Today on a dog and a butcher shop, but I'm not going to share that one today. I called an audible. Something happened this week, and I decided to go a different direction. I've got a different story that I'm going to share. Now, I'm going to ask a favor. If you've heard this story before, please act like you haven't. One Sunday morning, a man was in church. He forgot to silence his cell phone. So during the prayer, his phone rang. Right away, the preacher looked over and scolded him. Some people turned around and glared at him. After church services, some of the fellow worshipers, they admonished him for interrupting the silence of church. He continued to get dirty looks all the way to the car. His wife lectured him on his carelessness all the way home from church. Anyone could see the shame, embarrassment, and humiliation on his face. And after this, he's never stepped foot in that church building again. I'm gonna quit calling him. Later that evening, he went to a local pub. He was still nervous and trembling and shaking from that morning. While he was in the pub, he was up at the bar. He spilled his drink accidentally on the table. The waiter apologized for him, gave him a towel to clean himself up. The server hustled over, mopped up the floor, and he cleaned up the mess. The manager offered him a complimentary drink. She even came over and gave him a huge hug and said, "Don't worry, my friend. Who doesn't make mistakes?" He has not stopped going back to that bar. Feel free to go right in my HR, please report this fund.
He's kind of a doctor.
So, question. How do we treat people when they're in church?
With respect.
We treat them with kindness? How do we treat people anywhere?
Same way.
Hopefully the same way. How do you treat people when you're at work, your coworkers?
It's different.
I'll confess, I treat each one of them a little bit different. It depends on the day of the week.
How do you treat Dallas Cowboy fans? Whoa.
So, what does Ephesians 4:32 say? Somebody knows that one, right? Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. Luke chapter 6, verse 31. Treat people the same way you want them to treat you. 1 John 4:20 and 21. If anyone says, "I love God," and yet he hates his brother or sister, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother and sister whom he has seen cannot love God, whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, that the one who loves God must also love his brother and sister. Hate is a very strong word. How about shame? Or embarrassing? Or humiliation? How do we treat others when we are not in church? Do we ever do anything or act in a manner that causes others to feel shame or embarrassment?
Sometimes not intentionally.
Of course.
And sometimes if we're angry, intentionally.
Of course. Would we ever do anything to intentionally embarrass somebody?
I would hope not, unless it was that coworker that you didn't like.
That's what.
We should hope not. Proverbs 12, verse 4. An excellent wife is the crown of her husband, but she who shames him is like rottenness in his bones. 1 Corinthians 1:27. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to shame the things which are strong. Ephesians 4:29. Let no unwholesome word come out of your mouth, but if there's any good word for edification according to the need of the moment, say that, so that it will give grace to those that hear. When we speak to others, do we use wholesome words? All the time?
Be honest.
Not all the time.
I mean, that's our intention, and we would all like to be able to say yes, but we don't.
Sometimes not even to yourself.
Sometimes not even to yourself. Is it possible that we could shame someone with a look?
All my dad had
See,
to do
one
was give me
eyebrow?
a look growing up. He didn't have to say a word. He looked at me with those brown eyes. I'd be like, okay.
My dad called it the hairy eyeball.
The look. Philippians 2:3. Do nothing from selfishness or empty conceit, but with humility consider one another as more important than yourselves. John 13:35. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. If we were to do something in church to cause someone to feel shame or embarrassment or humiliate someone, would we expect to see them again?
No, they didn't have a choice. Not to have a choice.
How could they walk back in the door after that?
Well, sometimes if they're leaning back in their chair, they deserve to be humiliated.
If they-
Hey, Mike, you set up awfully fast there.
I was gonna say, those donuts are really good, they still might, despite all that, they're still gonna want those donuts.
Could be. Yes, sir.
I feel like you have to look at your motive. There are examples in the New Testament where we are actually to use shame to cure bad behavior among brothers. You know, you've spoken to them, with two or more witnesses, and they still continue in their sin, you're to bring it before the church. And that would be shameful, but you would be doing it in hopes to save their soul. And I think that's the key, especially in the verse, it's love. If you're shaming someone or embarrassing someone out of love for them, and that's your motive, that's a different type of shame and embarrassment than if you're actually trying to hurt them or embarrass them.
about 18 years ago, walking into my church and at the beginning of the church service, and a really elderly, I won't say, because I don't know what's elderly now, but a really, really old lady, she went over to the third pew from the front and said to the new people, "You are in my pew, please get up." And we never saw, those people got up all right and walked right out the door. And I just wanted, and it always reminds me, because I sit in the same pew every Sunday, and I'm getting older, but I just want to be careful that as I get older, I don't let words like that spew out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Because that was awful. I mean, that would be terrible.
I like to sit
Grumpy old lady.
I like to sit in a different pew because I feel like I can get the sermon from a different perspective.
Amen.
Okay. Now, we do have assigned seats. Is the seating chart, or is that on the website?
Well, we'll make sure you
Work in progress. It's important not to sit in the wrong person's seat. Okay.
I try to sit where it doesn't say don't sit.
We sit near the front, they're all open.
That's right. Plenty of seats in the front.
They are all.
I mean, we're joking about that, but there are people that I'm sure who go here may not be that upfront, but it really irritates them if you sit where they would normally sit. It's just a pew. Just rotate.
That's right.
Let's do it next Sunday. Nobody gets their pew set today. It does really irritate some people.
Just an outside perspective, way back here. So thank you all for not chasing me out of the little kid section. Because I have gone to churches where I sit in the wrong spot because me. And I came in and I was at that table and I saw a sign, reserved for children. And my first thought was, my second thought was, I don't have a choice, we'll see if they throw me out. And then you accepted me into membership, so hey. But that is a real thing, and I hope that most of you have been blessed that you've never had to deal with that. That is true. And never could make me go to church, but that's just because I'm a Jesus freak. But there are people I know that don't go to church to the encounters like that.
So when we come to church, how do we expect to be treated?
Kindness.
Kindness, grace, secret handshake at the door. Just between us, no one knows. How do we expect to be treated at work?
I would hope it's the same.
On time.
Does anybody expect to go to work and be treated with kindness? Depends on where you work.
If they have a secretary who's kind to you, sometimes don't. It's a joke.
You can meet HR after class as well. Do any of us go to work and expect to be treated with love?
Not always, some days are different than other days. Just never know.
Depends on the
But
day.
it's God's fate.
Depends on the people, depends on where you work. Why would we not expect to be treated with love?
I'm very lucky. People love seeing the handyman.
Amen.
I think the word appreciation, instead of using the word love, I like to be appreciated. You know, you don't have to kiss me every time, but.
I suppose if you don't pick up the double shift for Margaret, she'll get mad at you.
So, John 13:35, we just read this. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Can you have love for one another without saying I love you?
Yes.
Can you have kindness for one another the same way? So when we come to church, we've established we treat people a certain way, the church way. So when we go to work, do we treat people differently? So depends on where you work. Yeah, I've heard that. Well, it depends on the coworkers. I've heard that. Well, it depends on, there's a meeting. So really, when we go to work, when we're outside of church, do we treat people different depending on, why do we treat people different?
There are things we do treat people differently, but the core of it all should be the love of Christ. There is an underlying core that we should live, a foundation. And yeah, I treat Jim a little bit differently than I treat Wayne.
So does everybody.
Because Wayne is he just has a different personality.
Personality.
Yeah, and so there are differences, but I love both of these guys just the same, I respect them both the same. I appreciate what both of them do. But they're just the first two people I could figure out that were the most different. John's in that scale somewhere.
Matthew 6, verse 12, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. Proverbs 10, verse 12, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. Colossians 3:13, bearing with one another and forgiving each other, whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, you must do also. So how about at home? Do we treat people different at home?
I think sometimes it's human instinct, and sometimes though later on you realize maybe I should have not, depending on the situation.
And not always if she's naughty.
HR?
Thank you.
How about,
I shake hands more at church than I do at home.
Hopefully you kiss more love when you go to church.
how about in our community, or our neighborhood, or our street, or our building? We're supposed to be neighborly. Treat your neighbors,
Love thy neighbor.
love thy neighbor. Matthew 7:12, in everything, therefore, treat people the same way you want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. John 13:34, I'm giving you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you, that you also love one another.
Al was my example of how I should love my neighbor. And I think of that every day. And I try to live up to that example.
That's a good memory. Amen. There will always be others that are welcoming, generous, serving, complimentary, and loving. If people aren't feeling that here, are they going to stay here? No. If people aren't feeling that in your home, or in your community, or in your, circle of friends, are they gonna stay in that group? Just like the story. The man, his phone accidentally went off during church. Who's calling him during church? I don't know. But he was embarrassed. He was humiliated. He was getting the lecture all the way home. Why would he go back to that? But he did find a place where he felt comfortable and forgiving. Matthew 15 through 20. Peter said to him, "Explain the parable to us." Jesus said, "Are you also still lacking in understanding? Do you not understand that everything that goes into the mouth passes into the stomach and is eliminated? But the things that come out of the mouth come from the heart, and those things defile the person. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, acts of adultery, other immoral sexual acts, thefts, false testimonies, and slanderous statements. These are the things that defile the person, but to eat with unwashed hands does not defile the person."
When Gary was talking about the grumble today, after his wonderful retractions, that was good. Or is he not here? Anyway, is he okay? I was thinking this list right here, all these things, you were talking about grumbling just poisons the soul. And there it is, all this stuff defiles and poisons the soul, hurts your health. It just does so much damage to yourself.
And those around you.
And then that translates to those around you, exactly.
Sometimes our attitude as believers drives souls away. You can make a difference by how you treat people, especially when they make mistakes. You can make a difference by how you treat people, especially when they make mistakes. Has anyone in here ever made a mistake? I see most every head nodding, hands going up, smiling. We all make mistakes. We all fall short. And we should all strive to treat others how we want to be treated. Questions, comments?
I don't care what Mary Poppins said. I think she even made some kind of mistake.
What's difficult is how to control our reactions when we're mistreated. In some ways. I look back in my career, I had a very difficult principal for about 5 years. I had emotional scars after dealing with him. But just 2 weeks ago, I had a terrible encounter with a neighbor I hadn't even met. But this was all online. And I go, what did I do? You just have to step back and say, well, they've got problems and I need to act the Christian way or whatever. Well, anyway, I got out the next door and I got on the Destin, or I would have reacted. I would have said things that I would have regretted. So I just go, no, I'm not part of this drama.
I think one thing that God has definitely taught me too, in the sense of that kind of patience. Don't jump to conclusions sometimes.
Most of y'all know I've always been enamored with this concept of a person's story. And we just don't know what has led that person up to that reaction. Guarantee it's probably not just maybe they had a bad experience 10 minutes before. It's a lifetime of things that, this particular thing. I know there's there's a fellow I know, and he reminds me of the bad side of my dad, who was a little bit of a challenge sometimes growing up. He was a good man, but this particular person reminds me of his face when he was angry. And I don't know what led that person in. And now looking back at my dad, I know what some of my dad's thing was. He had a tough childhood, and he faced some of the same things that I faced. And he was ADD and a few other things, but they didn't know about ADD back then, and there was no reason for it. And you know, stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about kind of world.
Yeah.
But yeah, you just don't know what led that person to that response at that moment. And again, in that anger, it blinds somebody, and you got to feel for that person that's feeling blinded at the moment, and they're so deep in something. Most people, when they can step back from that, they're going to regret things that were said, things that were done.
That's right.
I know there are things I've done that I regret. It was just stupid.
Really?
Yes. I'm not that perfect.
Roger, you had your hand up?
I was just gonna say, I think that just from my own personal experience, one of the hardest things that I have to deal with, and I've been working on this for years and haven't been successful yet, but the hardest thing we have to do is control our emotions and be self-aware. Most of the time I don't think people are intentionally, for the most part, mean or rude, but we get into such habits like Gary was talking about, the grumpiness. We get into grumpy habits. We get into habits of sitting in our special seat, and it's just habits that we develop, but the way we react to those things and the crowd we're in, can change that. But just working on self-awareness, I think for me, is the biggest accomplishment I need to have as to how I react to people and treat other people. What that's worth.
That's good.
Gary says something very profound recently. Essentially what he said was that you never know what that person is going through. And that's done more for my attitude, I think, than anything I ever heard. Because it's so true.
For me, it's easy when that person's struggling or something. Back when I was working, I had a guy who wasn't like that, who wasn't struggling with stuff. He was head of engineering, and we were the product, and we would define product, and he was supposed to implement product, and he did that very well as long as it was a product he wanted to be implemented. But if it wasn't something he wanted, or if he didn't think that feature was good, 1 week before everything was supposed to be done, I'd be like, oh, that's going to get pushed off into the next release. The next quarter, that's going to be pushed off into the next, we just can't get to that. And I felt myself extremely angry and bitter and not treating him like I loved him or respected him or anything. And it was, this went on for nearly 2 years. And I struggled with it greatly and really never got past it. I still can't stand him today.
Should have talked to HR.
And you look at someone like that and you feel pity that person never learned how good it can be to live for others. So I've known people like that too. And I'll be honest, I feel for them, because
there's two powers in the world, and one's for good and one's for evil, and they weigh on us constantly. And by having these kinds of sessions, by studying, contemplating, we fight to be godly. But imagine your life if you haven't got that, if you have no godly influence, if you have nobody helping you and being fellowship with you and trying to encourage you. You're constantly under the influence of the devil and his minions. And so you're going to manifest his behaviors. And so when you see on Nextdoor somebody who's gone off like that in an ungodly way, in their heart, they don't have a godly spirit, it is because they don't have God. And when we feel ourselves pulled that way, that's the thing. Remember when that expression used to be around? I'm sorry that the U.S. is lost. We used to say, "What would Jesus do?"
Yeah.
And that's a really good test, you know. And even if it's just a time to answer that question, you probably dispel the situation. You know, something happens to you, what would Jesus do? And it's over.
That's good. Yes, sir.
A lot of times perception. Think about that for a minute. Our perception of that person sometimes, where we can be having a bad day and someone says something they don't. It may not say it in a manner that you are pleased with. And we can go off on that or blame them for it because of what has happened to you that day. It's not just that person, it could be us in the situation that we are in at that time. So we have to be careful in how we perceive that other person, where they may not be meaning it, it could be just me having that bad day. So it goes both ways. That spirit that we were talking about, you know, we have those two spirits, and it's the spirit that we're going to lean on that day is going to help us bring us through that day. So that's why we always have to, what will God do or say at that moment? We need to think about it before we speak.
On Wednesday night, we had a really good video. Wayne was teaching the class, and Rob Volker included a video that looked like a piece of a TED Talk, but the premise of it was strive to be the last to speak. And that's been resting on my head in my heart all week. Because it was a neat thought. It was a very neat video.
How's that working for you?
I can attest, not that good.
That was sort of humiliating.
But I meant it with love. Will you forgive me?
I'll work on that for about a decade.
So here's something that I do, and it works, and I haven't been able to do this, the entire time I've had issues with people at work or at church or spouse, when we're not agreeing on something or we're maybe not saying things the way we should. I'm just honest with people, and if they say something to me and it wasn't kind, I say, that hurt my feelings. Just right off the bat, just say it. Or could you word that differently? Which gives them a minute to think, maybe what I was thinking did not come out the way I thought it did, and it gives them a minute to think, And you can do it with a coworker, you can do it with a family member, you can do it with somebody in the grocery line. But it's okay just to say, that kind of hurt my feelings, the way you said that.
Get over it.
There you go. Or could you word that differently? And sometimes they look at you like, what are you talking about? Well, could you word that differently? And those have really helped me in many relationships. A family member, somebody I work with, or in a store situation even, or a restaurant. There's been some weird people get upset about stuff.
Jennifer's going to use that this week.
Use it.
Jennifer's going to use it this week.
Oh.
At work.
Oh, yeah. And you're not saying it out of anger, and you're telling how you feel, and then it's up to them. Sometimes they receive it nicely, sometimes they will not.
I tell you, to get over it.
I'm sorry, Wayne, I missed that.
I just said that if I tell people at work that hurt my feelings, they just laugh.
And then say,
That's what I
word
meant
that
to do.
differently.
They probably think
Nice
you're
job.
joking.
Nice job.
All right.
Thinking about all this, I've noticed that over the years, back in the 90s, when people talk to each other, now, through the social networks, emails, all this other stuff, we're not communicating like we used to.
It's true.
Like I can send you an email and say, come on, I don't appreciate that. That's what it reads in the email. But when I'm talking to you, it's, come on, you can do better than that. It's a totally different environment that we live in now. And I think that's affected all of our interpersonal relations. For whatever it's worth.
Those days, somebody brought up the point of, back in the day, if your friend didn't answer the telephone, you go walk over to his house and see if he's okay. And it's kind of a sad, I'm not gonna brag, but I'm 67 years old. I just do a lot of yoga. And I put those lines on my, but anyways, even though I'm not as old as some people might, it's really sad the way the world, everybody stares at their phone, and it's just, I really miss those days, and I really feel for the people, especially in those days, you walk to your friend's house, you walk to find out, you communicate more, you call them on the phone, and I think hopefully it doesn't tear us apart, but I'm not saying all cell phones are evil or bad, but the way everybody's so attached to it now, the way everybody's, it's kind of getting, it's kind of scary to me anyway.
Well, that's a good lead into this next story that I'll read and leave you with. This is a short parable. Some of you may have heard it before. If you have, please ask like you haven't. It's called the chocolate chip cookie parable. A young lady was waiting in the airport's departure area, pending her flight home. After realizing there was a delay, she bought a small bag of chocolate chip cookies to enjoy while she waited. She made her way to the VIP lounge to sit and relax. She sat down in an armchair to enjoy her cookies and read her book. Beside her sat a pleasant young man reading his book. The bag of cookies between them, neither one spoke. The young lady took her first cookie, but much to her surprise, the young man also took a cookie. And he said nothing. She also said nothing, but was clearly bothered. For each cookie she took, he did the same. Again, no words nor looks were exchanged, but this woman's anger grew. This continued until there was one cookie left in the bag. Then the man took the last cookie. He divided it into half, leaving half the cookie in the bag. That was it. She was so frustrated and bothered by this lack of consideration, she packed up her things and walked to her departure gate. She got on the plane and took her seat and began to settle in for her flight, still very bothered and very upset by this young man's lack of manners. So she went into her purse to reach for a book, and her heart sank. There in her purse was her bag of cookies. Unopened and untouched.
Oh, no.
She was so ashamed of how she responded. She was further upset by the realization it was too late to make amends and apologize. The young man had shared his cookies without saying a word. He even gave her half of the last one. He wasn't upset about it. He wasn't worried about it. He gave without condition or feelings of anger or bitterness. We can't predict the future. And if we could, we'd all big lotto winners from last week. Or we would successfully fill out the NCAA brackets every year, but we can't predict the future. Hebrews 13:16 says, "Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God." So the moral of this story, there are three things to take away and realize we can't take back. The stone after it's been thrown. The word after it's been spoken. And the time after it's gone. So just like someone said earlier, what would Jesus do in that situation? Do we assume that we understand the situation that we're in? He took my cookie. We assume we understand. Are we quick to judge when something happens? He took the last cookie. We're quick to judge sometimes. Then how do we feel in the end when we realize it's too late to right a wrong? That hurts. How do we feel in the end when, do I have a chance to go apologize? Could I find this young man? Could I find this person? But maybe we can slow down and try to do some things a little bit differently. WWJD. It's a great motto. Yes.
I think the WWJD is the principle of Christianity. When something happens, you don't know why it happened, but it was good for you, it's paid for. That's Christianity. If everybody did good to everybody, the whole world would be good. So you can't do it for Jesus, do it for somebody else.
Absolutely. Today, I woke up this morning and the Bible app popped up. The verse of the day, Hebrews 13:16. "And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased." And isn't that our goal? To please God? If not, it should be. I'm done. Any comments, any questions, any thoughts for the day? Anyone? I don't see any hands going up. I do want to say thank you to our vets, our veterans. Thank you for your service. Thank you for everything that you do, that you've done, and spouses as well. Thank you, class.
Very good, thank you.